My name is Nat. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I hope you're having a terrific day. For my first video, I wanted to do a little May wrap-up because, I mean, isn't that what you do on BookTube? You read books and then you talk about them? So, for my first book this month, I read Nick and Norah's Infinite Playlist by David Levithan and Rachel Cohn. This book takes place in a single night in which two teenagers that are part of the punk scene in New York meet, and then basically they end up sort of becoming friends and going off on this great adventure. I had never read any of David Levithan or Rachel Cohn's books before this, and to be honest, after reading, I don't know if I would read any more of Rachel Cohn. She wrote for Norah's chapters, and then David Levithan wrote for Nick's chapters, and it would alternate between each character. And Nick was interesting. I gotta say, 16-year-old Nat would have been absolutely in love with him. I really appreciated the punk setting. As a former Hot Topic kid myself, I really liked that. I could identify a lot of the references and connect with them, but where this book basically dropped in ratings for me was on Norah's chapters. Norah was... I don't know if Rachel Cohn was going for like the worst female character ever written or what, but like I could not stand her. She wasn't a good friend. She tossed out a lot of slut-shaming, some kind of transphobic comments, and in all honesty, like, she abandoned her drunk friend with two random dudes, and as a mom friend myself who takes care of everyone else in the group, did not appreciate that. So in the end, I think I gave this book 2.75 stars. I enjoyed Nick's chapters, but Norah's just, it was a downhill slide and it just kept getting worse. I also dove into some comic trades this month. The first one I read was Batman Beyond, Batgirl Beyond by Adam Beechin, Adam Archer, Scott Peterson, and Annie Wu. So if you're not aware, Batman Beyond is a future timeline where Bruce Wayne is now too old to be Batman. So instead, he has picked up a protege named Terry McGinnis, who is the newest Batman and is being trained by Bruce and learning as he goes. It was originally a WB TV show. I really recommend. It's actually pretty good, but I'd never actually seen anything of a Batgirl in this future timeline. The original Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, is now the police chief for this city, but hadn't seen futurized Batgirl to go along with Terry's Batman. However, in this one, we did. Unfortunately though, we only see her in one comic when there are 8 in this entire trade, so I wasn't too happy about that. Because Batgirl is one of my absolute favorites. I love Batman as well, if you can't tell. But Batgirl is a fave of mine, so I was really disappointed that she was basically only in one of the comics, and even then we didn't see a ton of her. It actually has random additional issues that really don't have anything to do with Batgirl. For example, the very first is more focused on Terry McGinnis's girlfriend Dana. Another thing I wasn't a big fan of with this was the shifting comic styles. In the very first comic, it is very much a more realistic comic style, whereas the last comic is more the original art style from the TV show. So that was a big transition. Wasn't a fan of it here. Sometimes I don't mind it, but it really took me out of the story with this one. For the one comic that did involve Batgirl, I'd probably give it a 4 stars. Overall, I guess more like 2.5. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't what I was promised, and so I was kind of disappointed by that. Next on my list. So I'm actually a part of an online book club. For this month, however, we actually chose to do 3 classic horror stories instead of a book. So for the first one, we actually dived into Edgar Allan Poe. I'd only ever read a single story by him, and I do know a lot about Poe, but I haven't actually read a ton of his stuff. But I do have this beautiful Barnes & Noble edition that's totally gorgeous and is also illustrated. So I was very excited to finally get to dive into this, and for this one, as you can tell, we were reading The Fall of the House of Usher. Essentially, the story just focused around this house that was once really rich and pretty prestigious called the Ushers. The story basically covers how the family has fallen from grace and how many of the members have actually passed away. And it did have some creepy vibes in it. I really enjoy Edgar Allan Poe's writing, so I would love to read more stories off of that one. Pretty creepy, but also oddly beautiful. This one I would probably give 3 stars. Enjoyed it. Another comic book trade. Yep. So for this one, I read the fantabulous Harley Quinn. Isn't that what they called her in that bad Birds of Prey movie? Fantabulous? I think so. This one is by Amanda Connor, Jimmy Palmiotti, Chris Hardin, Stephanie Rue, Alex Sinclair, and Paul Mounts. So this is actually the first comics where Harley is the headline character, and it was really fun getting to see her like this. She wasn't technically a villain, but she isn't quite a hero. I don't even know if I would quite call her an anti-hero. She just does what she wants, and she's just trying to survive at this point. She has broken up with the Joker, which I was very happy with, because I mean, unhealthy relationships, why are we supporting that? If you haven't watched the DC Harley Quinn TV show, it is fantastic. It's violent, it's got lots of swearing, and it just makes sense for who Harley is as a character. It's very fun, and this actually had a lot of pieces where I could see where the TV show got inspiration from this comic. For example, we get to see Harley working alongside Cy, who was once a cyborg, but is now just an old man who can't really lift all of the heavy machinery inside his body, which is just hilarious. It was just a fun ride. I really enjoyed this one. I actually would consider buying the next trade because I'm really intrigued to get to see more of Harley being in her own element and just being who she is. I'd probably give this one 4 stars. Next, I read another audiobook, this one called Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. It is essentially a retelling of the original Norse myths, and wow, I have to say, first Neil Gaiman book, and I loved it. It was so good. Neil Gaiman read the audiobook himself, and I really enjoyed the voices he did with it. They all were super interesting. I got to learn about some of the traditional myths, but also just have fun with his retellings of them. I really loved how it kind of sounded like for Thor, he seemed to be trying to channel Chris Hemsworth. And Loki, even though he is a villain in the Marvel Universe, I really appreciated that he didn't stick to that characterization of him. Sorry, my dog is making noise and running away with the toy. And he definitely highlighted the fact that Loki isn't a bad guy, in all honesty. He's just the god of mischief, and he does stuff to make himself laugh and ends up getting everybody else into trouble because of it. And I also really appreciated the way all of the stories eventually led up to Ragnarok, which is essentially the killing of all the gods by Surtur. This one was really awesome. I'm definitely excited to check out more of Neil Gaiman's stuff. Would certainly give this 4, maybe 5 stars. 4.5, somewhere around there. Next one, I read another story for my online book club. This one, time I was diving into H.P. Lovecraft. I hadn't read any H.P. Lovecraft previously either. I'm not the biggest sci-fi fan, but I do enjoy it sometimes. For this one, we read At the Mountains of Madness, and it's essentially about this man recounting the story of a Antarctic exploration and how this group of scientists he was with ended up uncovering a lost civilization and all of the horrors they ended up experiencing, and he's essentially telling this story to someone in order to encourage them not to go to Antarctica, which I mean, I hate the cold, so not a problem here. I probably give this one 3.5, 4 stars. It was pretty interesting. I did like it, and since I do have this big edition of H.P. Lovecraft stories, I do want to try and dive into this some more and learn some more about it. Okay, next. The final comic trade I read, I dived into the new Suicide Squad. I was really burnt by WB with that last Suicide Squad movie, so I was very apprehensive about diving into this. But it did have a different cast of characters, which made me intrigued. I was definitely surprised about Deathstroke being in here because he's not a team player, and unsurprisingly, he wasn't a team player in here either. However, Black Manta wasn't interesting to see him working with a team. Probably enjoyed him the most. He was the most level-headed and tried to actually keep the team on task. Poor man had to deal with Harley Quinn arguing with Dula Dent, who identifies as the Joker's daughter, and they continuously were arguing about who loved the Joker more. Was super ridiculous, but honestly pretty fun. Definitely would be intrigued to see some more from this team. Also, just Amanda Waller, even if you hate her, you gotta respect the woman. She is good at her job. Also was very intrigued to see that Vic Sage is alive again. You might know him as the original Question. I didn't know he was back apparently from the Blackest Night, or one of the Blackest Nights, because they've had a few now. Yeah, and now he works with the government alongside Waller. That was a shame because I really loved him as Question, but oh well. This one, I'd probably give 3 stars. Next, the final book I read for my online book club was The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This one is essentially about a governess working with a family and finding out that their house is haunted and that the ghosts essentially want to inhabit the children, I guess? They want the children. Wasn't really sure why. Was an interesting book. Wasn't my favorite of the stories we read. I don't know, the writing just didn't grab me as well as H.P. Lovecraft or Poe's did. It was still well written enough that I was intrigued, but it was a case of I'm like half listening and processing what's happened, but I'm not really taking in all of the story as well. So this one I guess I'd give it 2.5 stars. It was okay. Next on my list, I dived into the Dublin Murder Squad series. I added In the Woods to be on my list when I saw this cover at Barnes & Noble like 5 years ago, and I thought it was so pretty. And I was like, yeah, I want to read this, and then I never did. So I finally dived into it, and I was pretty happy with it. It is a mystery revolving around the main detective. He was a kid that lived in this small town in Ireland, and essentially one day he and 2 of his friends disappeared. The next day Rob was found, but his 2 childhood friends weren't. And 20 years have passed now. He is a detective himself. He still isn't sure what happened to his friends. He's then put on a case with his partner that took place in the same woods where he and his friends disappeared as a child, and this time a young girl has been murdered and she's about the same age, and they're not sure if the 2 cases are connected or what, but essentially Ryan and his partner Cassie have to solve one of these cases, maybe both. As a mystery, it was really well done, had a lot of suspense. I was flying through the chapters, which is what I need in a mystery. However, Rob was such an unlikable main character, and at the beginning that was totally okay. But eventually, as the story goes on, Rob does some stupid stuff that makes you question, how the hell are you a detective? There were some plot twists that I definitely guessed. There was a little additional twist that I didn't expect, and I did appreciate that Tana French added that in. However, by the end, I just could not stand Rob. He was the worst narrator for like the second half of the book and was driving me insane. It does turn out that apparently every book in the series is from a different perspective of a detective on the murder squad, and the next book, The Likeness, which I am planning to read in the next month, The Likeness is actually from the point of view of Cassie, Rob's partner, who was probably my favorite character, so I am excited about that. The next audiobook I read was Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. Shonda Rhimes, if you don't know, is the writer of Grey's Anatomy, Private Practice, Scandal, and How to Get Away with Murder. I don't watch any of those shows, so I didn't have a ton invested in her as a person, but I did actually really enjoy this book. Essentially, the story is about how Shonda's sister eventually pointed out the fact that even though she was this big name person in Hollywood, she constantly said no to things. She never accepted to go do all these amazing things she was being invited to. And so Shonda took it upon herself to say yes to everything she was asked to do for a year. Now, if you read this, I really recommend doing the audiobook. Shonda reads it herself, and it does include little clips of speeches she gave when she said yes, was forced to say yes to them, such as a commencement speech at her alma mater, which was a great graduation speech. I just graduated college myself, and since I didn't have a graduation, it was really awesome to kind of have this speech act as my commencement speech, which was really great. I thought it was a good message. Would definitely say some people might not appreciate her humor style or her writing style, because I did see some other reviews commenting that they thought certain things were just overplayed or this wasn't actually that funny, but as a whole, I enjoyed it. I'd give it 4 stars. Finally, this one is a shout out to my BFF Allie, who her favorite series is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I have never read this series because I was not an active reader whenever it came out, but I told her I would try to read it. So for this one, I read the Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel novellas by Sarah J. Maas, and I fairly enjoyed it. There were aspects I really liked. For example, the sort of villain character, the kind of villain character I thought was really well characterized. I really appreciated little pieces Sarah J. Maas put in that showcased he had classic abuser behavior, and I thought that was well written. Sam, who is a fellow assassin alongside Selena, was probably my favorite character. He seemed the most realistic, even if he wasn't completely fleshed out as Selena herself. However, I do in fact hope that Sarah J. Maas intended Selena to be a unlikable character at this point in the story, because dear God, I could not stand the woman. She was so vain. She was really aggravating sometimes. Every female who wasn't an assassin was basically beneath her, and it was like, you're not that great. Along with that, I do want to point out, she never assassinated anyone. We saw her murder people, but assassinating someone basically assumes that they are a big person of power, or that they are being killed for a political reason. Never saw it. So, however, I did think the world building was interesting. I am intrigued to see how Selena's character grows, because there are 7 more books for me to read. So I'm still gonna continue. I guess I'd put this one at a 3 stars, I think. I feel like that's a fair rating. Wow, 11 stories. That is shocking. I usually do not read that much in a single month. I guess quarantine is really kind of doing my reading life good. So thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Please hit subscribe. I am planning to make more videos, and if you guys have any comments or advice, I'd really love those. But also, if you just have your own thing to say about any of the books I read this month, please let me know in the comments down below. I will be reading them and responding, and I hope you guys continue to have a terrific day. Bye!